Imagine your entire city being kept alive solely to serve as living shields in the next battle. The Mongols would force captured civilians to march ahead of their armies, using them as human shields against enemy arrows. Those who refused were killed on the spot. The Mongol Empire conquered more territory in 25 years than Rome did in 400. But at what human cost? The tactics they used against conquered kingdoms went far beyond typical medieval warfare, entering realms of cruelty that changed the course of human history. 1. The art of terror, psychological warfare before battle. Before a single arrow flew from their bows, the Mongols had already begun their psychological conquest. Their reputation traveled faster than their horses, a carefully cultivated image of unstoppable terror that softened resistance before the first warrior appeared on the horizon. When a Mongol envoy approached city gates, they didn't arrive with mere demands. They brought evidence, severed heads, mutilated prisoners, and bone-chilling accounts of what happened to those who dared refuse Mongol terms. These brutal displays presented city leaders with a devastating choice. Immediate surrender meant survival under subjugation, while resistance guaranteed systematic extermination. As one Chinese governor reportedly exclaimed upon seeing Mongol evidence, "Better to be a Mongol dog than a Chinese corpse." This stark ultimatum eliminated any middle path and prevented prolonged resistance. Mongol intelligence networks heightened this psychological warfare. They dispatched spies and informants to gather detailed information about target regions long before attacking. These networks identified religious tensions, political rivalries, and cultural vulnerabilities that could be exploited. Buddhist cities received different warnings than Muslim ones. Trading hubs heard threats about commercial extinction that agricultural communities would not understand. After conquering resistant cities, the Mongols deliberately spared a small number of survivors, not from mercy but calculated cruelty. These traumatized witnesses, often bearing visible mutilations, became living warnings to the next targets. A Persian chronicler described these messengers as walking nightmares, whose tears told more truth than 1,000 proclamations. Their first-hand testimony proved more convincing than any written threat. The Mongols weaponized communication itself. They spread rumors of warriors drinking blood and possessing supernatural abilities on horseback. Their forces appeared larger by tying branches to horses' tails, creating dust clouds that suggested massive troop movements. Captured Mongol soldiers rarely revealed operational details even under torture, reinforcing their aura of invincibility. This psychological campaign served a practical purpose. Cities that surrendered immediately were integrated into the empire with minimal bloodshed. Their administrative structures remained intact, local customs were frequently respected, and taxation, while heavy, was systematic rather than punitive. The Mongols recognized that ruling preserved functional cities that better served their imperial ambitions. The effectiveness of these tactics transformed human fear into a weapon as devastating as cavalry charges. One Arab historian noted that cities fell to Mongol whispers before they fell to Mongol arrows. Entire regions surrendered without resistance after hearing about neighboring territories' fates. The Mongols' military genius lay not just in battlefield tactics, but in their intuitive mastery of human psychology. Centuries before formal psychological warfare doctrine existed. 2. Rivers of blood, the price of resistance. For those who resisted Mongol intimidation, consequences went beyond defeat. They faced a mechanized system of extermination that transformed conquered territories into nightmarish processing grounds. When the prosperous Persian city of Nishapur rebelled against Mongol rule in 1221, they sealed their fate in one of history's most methodical massacres. Tolui Khan, Genghis Khan's son, had been killed by a stray arrow during earlier fighting at Nishapur. His widow, Toregene Khatun, demanded extraordinary vengeance. Every living resident would be beheaded, and their skulls arranged in 3 separate pyramids, one for men, one for women, and one for children. The execution was carried out with chilling efficiency. Mongol soldiers systematically moved through Nishapur, street by street, building by building. The death toll reached approximately 1.7 million people according to Persian historians, a number that, while likely exaggerated, reflects the unprecedented scale of the slaughter. No one was spared, not even cats and dogs, which were killed to ensure nothing living remained in the city. This wasn't an isolated incident of rage-fueled vengeance. The Mongols had developed standardized protocols for cities that refused their initial demands. Their approach to conquest had an almost industrial quality to it, with clear procedures for processing captured populations. Unlike other medieval armies that typically besieged cities to extract wealth or territory, Mongol sieges often ended with complete demographic replacement, the original population removed, and the emptied city repopulated with cooperative subjects transported from elsewhere. In conquered territories, Mongol commanders implemented a sophisticated three-tier classification system. First were skilled workers, artisans, engineers, scribes, and physicians, who would be identified and separated. These valuable human resources were often transported thousands of miles to Karakoram or other Mongol centers. Marco Polo reported seeing entire communities of displaced craftsmen working in Mongol territories, creating a forced migration of technical expertise across Asia. The second tier consisted of able-bodied civilians who could serve immediate military purposes, primarily as human shields in future sieges or as forced labor. Those in the third tier, anyone without immediate value, faced summary execution. This pragmatic approach maximized the empire's human capital while eliminating potential resistance. The Mongols' methodical nature extended to body counting. Each soldier was required to meet execution quotas during massacres, presenting severed ears as proof of their kills. Contemporary accounts describe Mongol officers sitting at tables, counting ears like accountants tallying receipts. This bureaucratic approach to mass killing was previously unknown in warfare. Perhaps most terrifying was the Mongols' practice of erasing cities entirely from the physical landscape. After the fall of Urgench in 1221, Genghis Khan's engineers diverted the Amu Darya River to flow through the city's ruins, literally washing away all evidence of its existence. Archaeological investigations have only recently confirmed the locations of several cities destroyed so thoroughly that they disappeared from historical records. At Balkh, once a center of Buddhist learning, Mongol forces dismantled the city stone by stone after executing the population. When Arab travelers passed through the region decades later, they reported finding nothing but scattered rubble where a great city once stood. The message was clear. Resistance didn't just mean defeat, it meant erasure from history itself. The Mongols approached conquest with a resource optimization mindset that prioritized efficiency above all else. Their brutality wasn't about sadism, but calculation, creating a system where immediate surrender became the only rational choice. Cities that submitted without resistance often preserved their populations, and sometimes even their governing structures, merely paying tribute and providing troops when required. 3. Weapons of mass destruction, biological warfare, and engineering horror. This calculated approach to conquest extended beyond their classification system into something far more sinister: the systematic weaponization of human biology itself. When traditional weapons proved insufficient, Mongol engineers developed methods to transform corpses, living captives, and even human fat into instruments of warfare that would horrify modern military tacticians. The Mongols' most infamous biological warfare experiment occurred during the 1346 siege of Kaffa, modern-day Feodosia, in Crimea. Facing stubborn resistance from the Genoese defenders, Mongol forces under Khan, Jani Beg, encountered an outbreak of plague within their own ranks. Rather than retreat, they transformed disaster into opportunity. Soldiers catapulted plague-infected corpses over the city walls, deliberately exposing the population to the deadly pathogen. Horrified, Genoese merchants eventually fled the contaminated city by sea, unknowingly carrying infected rats and fleas to Mediterranean ports. This single tactical decision potentially helped trigger the pandemic that would eventually kill one-third of Europe's population. What makes this biological attack particularly noteworthy isn't just its devastating effectiveness, but how it showed the Mongols' intuitive understanding of disease transmission centuries before germ theory existed. They recognized that disease could travel from corpse to living person, and that confining people in close quarters would accelerate its spread. This wasn't random cruelty, but a calculated exploitation of natural phenomena for military advantage. The Mongols' approach to siege warfare involved equally disturbing innovations. When confronting cities protected by moats or defensive trenches, their engineers developed what military historians now call human bridging. Captured civilians and prisoners would be forced at arrow point into these water barriers, creating literal bridges of human bodies. Often the first waves of captives would drown or be crushed, while subsequent waves would walk across their bodies. Mongol cavalry would then charge across this macabre bridge, sometimes while victims at the top of the pile were still alive and screaming. Another horrific innovation involved the extraction and weaponization of human fat. The Mongols discovered that human fat burned at extremely high temperatures, hot enough to damage stone fortifications that wouldn't yield to conventional fires. Captured civilians would be systematically processed, their fat rendered down in large cauldrons, and then applied to structures the Mongols wished to destroy. Contemporary accounts describe the sickening smell that would hang over battlefields for days after these attacks. The Mongols also pioneered what modern military strategists would recognize as human mine detection. Captives were forced to march ahead of advancing Mongol forces into areas suspected of containing traps, pitfalls, or hidden defenders. This tactic served multiple purposes: detecting dangers without risking Mongol lives, depleting enemy ammunition, and psychologically devastating defenders who were forced to kill innocent civilians or reveal their positions. Their torture techniques reflected the same calculated efficiency. The infamous death by 1,000 cuts wasn't merely about inflicting pain, it was designed to extract maximum information while serving as a spectacle that would crush the will to resist. Victims would be systematically sliced in non-lethal areas, prolonging both their suffering and their ability to provide intelligence. These public demonstrations also served as training for Mongol warriors, teaching precision with bladed weapons while reinforcing the consequences of betrayal or resistance. What distinguishes these Mongol tactics from the general brutality of medieval warfare was their systematic, almost industrial application of human suffering as a military resource. While contemporary armies might engage in sporadic atrocities, the Mongols developed standardized procedures that treated human beings as raw material in their war machine. They didn't just kill, they processed, extracted, and utilized human bodies and human suffering with ruthless efficiency. So what do we make of the Mongol legacy? Beyond the staggering death tolls and ingenious brutality, they created something unprecedented, an empire where fear itself became infrastructure. Their methods weren't random cruelty but calculated statecraft that forever altered how power projected itself across civilizations. The psychological scars they inflicted outlived their empire by centuries. From China to Hungary, generations of children were frightened into obedience with whispers of Mongol return. Yet this same empire created history's largest zone of protected trade, unified disparate knowledge systems, and inadvertently connected worlds that had never before communicated. That's history for you. Brutal, complex, and rarely simple. Subscribe for more untold stories and comment below with which empire we should dissect next.